Hey folks, Steve here with another Nations in Arms video. In this video, we'll be looking at the year of 1811 in the Grand Campaign. But for those who are only popping into this video and haven't been watching the previous ones, this is a redux from a restart of the Grand Campaign starting in 1809. Our 1805 playthrough ended early due to a string of fantastic luck for France, but not wanting to miss out on all the potential gameplay, we restarted in 1809 and have seen France defeat Austria, as is tradition, and have moved on to other conflicts on the continent. So with 1811, we are starting to get into the later stages of the period. There's still plenty of playing here to go, at least four, potentially up to 4 more years, 16 turns left in the game. So still a lot ultimately to have happen. Now, off camera, I've done some of the sort of spring interphase activities like production and event card drawing and diplomacy. So let me briefly describe where things got with that. I learned a very harsh lesson this time because I sort of jumped the gun and I started doing production before the event phase, or the really earliest parts of the phase where you're supposed to draw event cards and kind of deal with a public event before you do production. But I had jumped the gun. I had done production, and of course, the event cards that came out ultimately affected the production of Britain and ultimately Spain, such that I kind of had to redo production a little bit. So shame on me. I jumped the gun. I really need to follow the sequence of play. But all is in good order here. Now, France got a lot of event cards and managed to have things pretty well set up for itself. Probably the most significant thing to occur was that they dinged Britain with inflation, but Britain was able to counter with the Rothschild card to give it the money it needed in excess of its production and what it loaned or gifted rather to Spain, to try to influence Russia diplomatically. So what's really interesting as Britain, which is really the coalition player in a two-player game, but in this situation in particular, Britain only gets so much money, right? They get money for just their national budget, and then they get money from trade. The vast majority of the British trade at this point, due to the continental system and other things, is from the Ottoman Empire, amusingly enough. But that money can only go to so many things. You have to really earmark money for diplomacy. So Britain had squirreled away enough to have basically 12 credits for influencing Russia, 4 to pay to even try to influence Russia, and then 8 more to buy up modifiers. And then there was a national modifier bonus as well. So Britain had to earmark for that. They also had to earmark building their own stuff to try to, keep trying to attrit France and have forces to be sent to Spain from Britain, which represents this force over here. And then they wanted to give money to Spain, and they surely wanted to try to do that. But you can only spend so much and do so much, to begin with. The big problem, and what caused the rework, was that France had pulled a foreign war card that could be played against Spain. So I'm going to zoom in that Bolivar card. So Spain must send 1 fleet, 2 infantry steps, and a leader to the foreign war box, and we have done that. And this foreign war card, you have to roll a 7, which means that you're not going to be able to succeed this first year. So just straight up, that foreign war is going to be going on for a while, which puts Spain in a really tough position because, I mean, just realistically speaking, they didn't have a lot of money to begin with because most of their country is occupied by France, with a couple of exception fortresses. So they had a little bit of money, and then they got more money from Britain, but a lot of that actually got taken away because Spain did not have any fleets on the board, and to fulfill the foreign war card, they basically had to have spent the money to build a fleet to go into the foreign war. So a huge amount of money that was going to have a Spanish army and some infantry steps and like a force to contest the French, uh, got denuded away because we had to spend all of our budget on a fleet and stuff to be sent to this foreign war. So while it looked for a second like maybe Spain was going to have at least a fighting chance, that foreign war has really worked out for the French and is sucking away some of the manpower that Spain would have needed to contest. So they're not totally out for the count. There's a lot that could occur here. The chit order will matter. Will Wellington try to land somewhere in the rear of the French position and start cutting off supply? All of that is feasible. There's a lot of things that could happen. It's not a foregone conclusion that France will win the Peninsular War, will win the War of Liberation. It is still a bit up in the air. Now, granted, the French armies in Spain did get reinforcements, so they were able to get a couple steps each per the replenishment rule for armies. You can send steps to the armies to replenish reduced units. So they've still got a pretty robust force in Spain that will, they're swarming it at the cost. There is a cost strategically for doing this. I am kind of leaving my butt hanging in the air a bit in regards to Russia. Now, this could have been much worse for France because basically, they have one French army in Poland under Davout out here, and the Prussian army is in the Mandatory Alliance. So technically, the Empire faction has two armies, but across the border in Russia are now three Russian armies, and they're all fairly robust as far as armies go. And of course, having three armies means they can certainly lay on the zones of influence and cause a lot of problems for anyone that they're going to be fighting. So there was definitely a like, oh boy, Eastern Europe could erupt pretty nastily in the short term here. But unfortunately for the coalition, the British diplomacy roll missed it by a hair. So this was the die roll, the last thing I did before we started recording. I got a 7, and they had a +4 to the die roll, 2 from paying for the bonuses, and then a natural 2 British modifier for Russia. So a +4, and really a +4 is about as good as it could possibly get, and they just didn't get it. Yeah, so they just didn't get it. And because I don't think Russia is considered to have been conquered previously, there's not a modifier for that. They came to an accord, the Treaty of Tilsit, the whole thing. So they just didn't get it. It was a very close die roll. They just didn't get it, which means that one, Britain wasted 12 pounds, whatever you want to call it, which could have gone to building stuff, right? But that was the risk, right? We needed to make it as certain as possible to go for it, and that was also all the money that Britain had budgeted for diplomacy, which means while we will have diplomacy phases the rest of this year in 1811, neither Britain or France has any money to influence a major power. So the major power front is going to be quiet, unless France declares war on Russia, which we're really not in a position to do that right now. So in the big scheme of things, luck has certainly gone France's way, in particular during this interphase where they were getting more cards than Britain in the first place, but their cards are a nice. The cards have nice synergy with what's going on the map, and then the opportunity for a distraction by having Russia invade Poland and Prussia isn't happening yet. Now, it could happen in 1812, but we'll see. So the French goals for this turn, just to speak to that before we start playing through, the French would like to finish sealing up the Peninsular War. They have reinforcements built up to enter northern Spain to just make certain that they can hold the country for the conquer phase, whichever season that can occur. We do need to take Portugal, but I do see it very, very feasible that France can finish it up. It is something that they're putting a lot of their weight into. The faster they can knock Spain out, the sooner they can start sending their armies back to Germany and Prussia, because eventually, basically in summer of this year, Austria will join the mandatory alliance of France, which means we can actually move French armies through Austrian territory and sort of shore up Davout by moving units out to here. And the thing is, the distance from Spain to Austria is so far that we probably aren't going to be ready to go in 1812. But if our armies are at least in good shape and Russia declares war on France or joins the coalition in the spring of 1812, at least we'll be fighting a one front war. Spain will be done, and we can duke it out in that direction as best we can. If we can get the jump on Russia, then hey, great. But that's going to be a concern for 1812. So we can at least still push Russia off to that time frame. If we get caught unprepared, that could be a problem. But the Austrians we will have one good production phase in control of Austria to build up Austrian armies on the eastern border. So there'll at least be something there. It won't be a complete crapshoot. So that's the French strategy. I think for the coalition, their options are few. It's really just Britain and Spain. So they got to fight the Peninsular War. They got to use Wellington to do something. The other problem is France spent some of its copious production in building up defenses at the ports. So Wellington can't really, unless he goes for Nantes, doesn't have very many good options on the French coast. He might try to land in Saint Sebastian to try to cut off supply to French armies or something. We'll have to see how it plays out. So Britain has limited options. Trying to cross the straits could be a problem, but maybe they try to form up a lot of the British armies in Britain and try to cross the channel. I don't think the coalition can have a coherent strategy lacking Russia, so they just need to bide their time and do what they can. The other thing we could look at doing is, if this is really the turn where things fail out, then Britain is going to have to put all of its money into diplomacy in 1812, which means, building what it can, but then putting a ton of money into diplomacy such that we can continually try to bring Russia in, and then even eventually try to flip Prussia and or Austria over. Now, the longer Prussia and Austria are in that mandatory alliance, the easier it actually is over time to flip them over to the coalition. So that's a known risk for France. It's a known opportunity for Britain. And so if nothing else, Britain will spend money trying to flip these guys so that the late stages, the War of the Sixth Coalition can be working in earnest. I'll probably do a whole separate video about how all of these little diplomatic systems work together to actually do a pretty good job of illustrating and implementing what historically happened, with still some wiggle room for things to be a little ahistorical or unexpected, which I think is a real strength of the game. So expect like a 40-minute video where I just talk all about that stuff and how that all connects together. I won't do too much of that here. So anyway, that's the beginning of all of that. There will be plenty of fun stuff to do here. I will try to go through this turn relatively quickly. So what I'll do when I cut here, we'll be pulling chits. I'll show the aftermath of the first so many chits to kind of give you guys the status, and then we'll show the end of spring, and then I'll do the same for summer, autumn, and winter, so that this video will be probably around 45 minutes total to an hour, but we'll cover all of 1811. So, all right, here we go. Okay, here we are partway through spring. We're actually several chits deep. We pulled the spring quarters chit once. But basically, the guerrillas haven't had a chance to move yet. They're being chased around and pinned. They're kind of hemmed in. The French have surged through Spain. The reinforcements kind of marching down in force. Napoleon took Lisbon and is situated here outside the last fortress of Portugal, which means that Portugal is likely to be conquered here. The British naval chit did come out, but we didn't have enough ships concentrated to transport Wellington yet. So all the fleet maneuvers were to get them all collected into port, so that we can actually launch an amphibious invasion in the summer. But as it stands right now, uh, midway through the turn, I am reasonably confident that Spain is going to be put to peace, basically, and they are done. Like they're donezo. They're finished. We have France has won the Liberation War. Uh, Now there is a uncontrolled Spanish fortress that Spain still has. Granted, we have forces nearby that would take it very likely next turn. But I'm going to have to double check the surrender rules on this. Now, there are chits left in the cup, but I don't think there's anything that the guerrillas could do to make a real difference here. They could try to sneak over around here, but it's not going to be enough to try to siege Cartagena. Um, so I'll have to look to see if there's anything that can be done and if it will make a difference. But I just wanted to show, like, at this point, with the failures of Britain to get forces in and all the economic disruption, they're on the tail end of things basically. And what's going to be super weird is, at least according to the rules, um, if you if you win the liberation war as France, like you basically peace out with Spain and you get four peace clauses. So it's like you basically conquered them, right? And you get four peace clauses. There is no option, as far as I know, about continuing the war. So like the coalition player can't pick that, I don't think. So you get the four clauses. I don't know what are the best clauses to get, to be quite honest. It's not like Spain gives you a lot of money. Maybe you go for extended peace. You can't do mandatory alliance, um, because the conditions for mandatory alliance would not be in play. And I don't think you would want them to be in a mandatory alliance, because the Spanish instability rule still applies. Like if Spain is not in a war of liberation and they're your ally, according to the rules, as far as I can tell, even if somehow, let's say, Britain diplomatically brings Spain in on their side, there's actually a strong likelihood that they'll flip and have a war of liberation against Spain or something like that. Like there's this whole thing where, like, hey, it feels like, when you look at all the rules together, if the war of liberation against Spain doesn't go well for Spain and France wins, like I don't know what that really represents, right? You would think, shouldn't we stay in control of Spain overall at that point? So I'm not sure what the designer was thinking here, that like France like totally beats the hell out of Spain, but decides that, you guys can have your own king. We'll enter into a neutrality agreement, but you got to pay something to us, or you got to give us something. I don't really know what that means or what that is. So I'm going to have to spend a little bit more time looking at this, but I wanted to show you guys this status because I think it is significant. Um, and again, before long, um, I would expect to see that Portugal is also conquered and gets aligned, or gets, I don't know, gets reestablished under the control of France for some period of time, and that is going to be a further pain on Britain and losing more money with the continental system. So those things seem very likely at this point. I'm not sure what can be done right now to make a difference there, but we'll see. Okay, here we go, guys. That is the end of Spain's War of Liberation in failure, or to be honest, I don't really know what to say in terms of interpreting this as a historical narrative. So let me talk briefly about the end of the turn. The last couple chits came out. There was an opportunity for the remaining coalition forces to move around on the map with a one chit, but there really was not much to do there. Really limited capability to operate. Uh, France had dedicated huge amounts of manpower to settling the matter, and they succeeded. That's really the way I look at that. Um, Now, a couple of things just in terms of the strategy, and I'll talk about this elsewhere in other videos as well when we talk about analyzing the game. I think what maybe one thing I didn't do very well was leveraging the gorillas to do like long-term distraction. What I would keep trying to do is like move around and cut these guys out of supply and cause them attrition, which was working, but I might have been better. And as it turns out, I might have gotten some things wrong. I think you can produce gorillas and put them anywhere, so long as they're not adjacent to an enemy unit and an enemy controlled fortress. Now, granted, France pretty much controlled every fortress in Spain, so there's some select places that they could be placed, like right here is a place that they could do it. And then when the one chit comes up, they could try to maneuver and sit on an important supply link or sit and mask a fortress because they're one step units. They could sit on some of the forts. And I didn't do that as much because I was trying to create just direct attrition to the armies that were moving around, and that sort of worked. If I had stayed back here, I guess the French could have countered by having a screening force just kind of push the guerrillas out of the way and kind of keep the supply lanes open. So I don't know. I could see there being some fun in just playing the Spanish ulcer scenario and then perfecting the guerrilla strategy and understanding exactly what the best way to use them was. At the end of the day, a lot of guerrillas got caught rolling really, really low on evasion checks out in the open. There were times where you really needed more than one guerrilla in a localized area to completely shut off the supply tracing path. So because most units or most stacks in the game do not have a zone of control or influence. Um, so there were some limited things that they could do. They really needed the support of armed forces in tandem. The reality was, when Wellington really ate crap in Galicia, that really shut things down pretty badly. And again, if not for the Bolivar foreign war kicking up, the Spanish might have had more capability to catch some of these French armies in a bad situation, maybe out of supply, and it just didn't happen. So the weird thing is, the requirement was not to control every fortress, but to control every harbor in Spain and Portugal, and we did succeed at that. And so that triggered the peace. When we got to the end of the turn, is when I adjudicated that should take place. Um, and so we do the whole like mandatory peace conquer stuff for Spain. Technically, France is still fighting Portugal because Portugal is an ally of Britain, but Portugal's on its last legs. So we would probably see the rest of Portugal fall here over summer and fall. We'll see what happens. The problem for the French is that their supply situation is funky. Um, I think it can be rectified because all that really needs to happen is these depots need to go like one, two, three, four, um, and then like I don't know. I mean, you'd have to look at it. We have to reestablish our supply line because when we conquered Spain, when we came to some peace, and again, I'm not sure how to articulate that in a narrative yet, or we'll come up with something here in a second. All the fortresses go back to Spanish control. The French can move in the country, but they have to use their own supply lines. We still have our own depots out and about, but a lot of them aren't in a good position to maintain supply. The British are in the Western Med blocking supply through Gibraltar, which is French controlled and will stay French controlled for the time being. And then even through here, like, we want to count 4 movement points to a depot. We're really not in range of that. We need to move a detachment. So one, two, three, four, five. So one, two, three, four, and then one, two, three, four. Then, one, two, we can create a detachment over here, and then we'd be in supply. So there is a supply path to maintain the Portuguese effort. What the British could end up doing is maybe dropping Wellington in Lisbon, do an amphibious assault, or maybe in Porto or something to make something work such that the fighting continues, and then France has to figure out its supply tracing, and there'll be a fight there. Though I'm worried that Wellington won't be able to defeat Napoleon, and I think the odds are against Wellington. For as good as Wellington could come in with 5 to 6 steps against all these French in Spain that would go to Portugal, feels like maybe a bad option. So it's actually really tough decision making for the coalition from here. And for the rest of the year, basically, it's either try to contest Portugal. Meanwhile, the French are going to continue to get set up for Russia, so that by the beginning of 1812, I mean, we'll probably see some sort of conflict with Russia or a delay. Um, so yeah, tough. Now, when we look at the actual peace deal, um, what I would maybe say is, so this is how it hashed out. The conqueror France said, "Give me extended peace," because originally the I rolled boxcars for the mandatory peace, which meant that for 3 years Spain's going to be in a mandatory peace out to spring of 1814. But then when it came to the peace clauses, I said, "Well, give me extended peace," and then I rolled high enough that it's basically through the end of the scenario, through the end of the game, Spain is in a mandatory peace with France. So that much is true. There is no diplomatically influencing Spain on the coalition part. Spain is out. I then said, join the continental system, join the club. So we did that, which is going to impact British British trade heavily because they're going to be in the continental system for as long as we're at peace. Basically, there's no way to drop out of the continental system right now for them. And then the coalition side of my brain had to pick the other two clauses. And the only thing that I could think of that would not help France too much, because it's either we give France territory of Spain, which I don't like the idea of, or we give them something else. So indemnities, and that's not going to be a whole lot of money for France. And then military aid, where basically France will get access to a couple core of Spanish units, which Spanish units really aren't that great, and I'd rather it be Spanish units than more money for France to build French units. So that's the deal. Now, when you think about like what does this historically represent, maybe with the peace clauses coming out the way that they did, maybe we could interpret this as being France winning the Liberation War, and then a peace treaty being signed where like maybe Napoleon's brother remains king of Spain, but that the French will agree to vacate the country and provide a minimal support. So they're technically neutral, but like they lean in favor of France with the military aid and being part of the continental system, but they're basically not going to be involved in supporting the broader war. That is kind of how I think that hashes out. Um, and what that means is when Spain is neutral, which it will be, France controls it for production and movement purposes. So, basically, France can choose to build up Spain to its heart's content with its money because there is no way for Britain to pull Spain into their side. If it was possible that they could come in during 1814, France would probably not build Spain up over these next couple years of production. They would sandbag it like Britain sandbagged Austria. But instead, because we know they're going to be in mandatory peace until the end of the game, France can build up the Spanish army as much as they want, which would just uh, basically be a deterrent against Britain from declaring war on Spain. And that's something that Britain could do to maybe keep the continental system from being in place or any number of things, or to open up a new front against France. They might try to declare war on Spain. If they do that, that would be, there's less incentive to do that because, again, France will build Spain back up. So it's kind of an interesting little thing there. If it had ended up being a different set of peace clauses, we could describe that narratively differently. But I think that's the right way to describe what's happening here. So yeah, France did win, but it's not like Spain is now part of the French Empire. There's a very um, sensitive political agreement that ends the bloodshed and provides some benefit to France. So there we go for the spring turn. I'm going to start getting ready here for the summer turn. Okay, hey guys, I played through all of summer because there ended up not being a huge amount to do. Uh, it was really just down to what does Britain decide to do while France kind of gets in a good shape. Now, the one critical there are two sort of critical things that have occurred, maybe three depending on how you count them, and I just describe them very quickly. At the beginning of the summer turn, I noticed that I did actually, in fact, still have two money left over for France, and we could try to influence a minor. And sure enough, Sweden was neutral because of the diet card we played previously. So I gave it a shot, and sure enough, Sweden has joined France as part of the Empire faction. So Bernadotte is back part of the crew, as it were. So what that will functionally mean here very soon is that the continental system will be in effect because Russia technically is still part of the continental system, as is Denmark, as is the coast of France. Now Spain is now back under the continental system, and technically our control of Portugal will mean that Portugal is included as well, and our continued control of Naples in basically these areas right here. We don't count islands, so Sardinia and Sicily actually don't count for that, for continental system calculation, as far as I know. And it has to go from basically Trieste to St. Petersburg. Now, so long as that holds true, if that stays that way through the rest of this year, that's the first winter, and then we'd have to make that last all the way through 1812, and France could win an automatic victory. That will probably not happen because Britain is going to throw all of its money, all of its conceivable cash, into trying to make sure that Russia switches sides, and then eventually Britain can get Prussia to betray France, and eventually Austria, and kind of get to the more historical narrative, since we're off the beaten track with some French victories again. That's kind of the thought process here. Okay, so that's one important thing, and the reason why that matters so much is that Sweden owns Swedish Pomerania. So if Sweden is at war with us, France needs to take Swedish Pomerania. So long as Sweden is allied to France, then Swedish Pomerania is part of the continental system. So that was the one thing. The other thing that matters is that I decided to have Wellington do something else than do a naval invasion, because France has kind of they've gotten their supply stuff figured out, and they're starting to pull out of Spain, except for the critical supply line that's coming over through here and providing supply to the French forces that are working to finish the conquering of Portugal. Because it's a minor country, that will be adjudicated at the end of winter, so we're not really there yet. And either way, we're still besieging Elvas with a siege +4 that still hasn't succeeded yet, but will shortly, and we will see Portugal conquered. So that will kind of seal the deal for the western end of things. We have some forces garrisoned in Gibraltar, so France is feeling pretty good there. And again, strong defenses along the coasts have been put in place. You could almost see that as an Atlantic wall situation, but either way, we're set up there pretty good. Napoleon himself is pulling out of France, and the rest of these armies are kind of working their way through Spain. They're going to have to hightail it and move swiftly, because they do need to try to get to Prussia soon, knowing that war with Russia is almost certainly coming, no matter which way you look at it. The final thing that matters here is that, so what did Wellington do because of that? Well, figuring that any naval invasion into Portugal would probably eventually fail and be a waste of time, Wellington, the British decided to try a different angle and go to where the French were maybe weakest, and that was to try to make a channel crossing here at the Straits of Dover. There was also, for a period of time, a contemplation of, hey, maybe we ought to declare war on Spain and make Spain an ally to France, and then probably, very likely, we have a what do you call it? An instability check. But that felt kind of weird, and I'm not sure I want to do that. The the rules are weird there. Okay, I'll just say that it's a little bit. It's feeling a little incomplete to where, okay, there's a mandatory piece. Like, what happens? What happens if Britain decides to declare war on Spain? Like, it should that mean that there's a potential liberation war that occurs there? It feels like it shouldn't work that way, but that would also be a mechanism by which Spain is always and forever a huge pain in the butt, which is maybe the right answer, but I don't know. So in the meantime, anyway, sorry for the distraction. Wellington tried to make that crossing at Dover. And here's the thing: after all the modifiers were worked out, it was a dead even minor battle for modifiers. It was really going to be up to the dice. What do the dice give us? And I shit you not, I couldn't believe my eyes. Wellington rolls snake eyes. Very bad. He managed to do one step loss to the French Army of the North with the modifiers, but snake eyes, right? Terrible. And then I rolled for the French, and they rolled 2 6s, which meant 4 step losses after modifiers to Wellington's army. I don't. Someone can calculate for me what the odds are there of one side rolling 2 1s and the other side rolling 2 6s. I don't understand. The dice gods apparently want France to be the victor of this game. It almost felt unfair. I don't know how to deal with that. And we've seen some odd luck when it came to naval battles, but it's been a while since we've seen a land battle go so lopsided. And I don't know. I usually roll attacker first when we do this because the attacker is initiating action. If for some reason I decided to roll the defender first, then Wellington would be pushing deep into northern France, I guess. But that's not how it worked out for them. And I tend to follow that same cadence of roll attacker first. So I don't know. It's real hard for the coalition to try to come back from something like that. And so now all eyes are to the east. There's a fire in the east. The Atlantic Wall is up. This is more like World War II than we might think. So I do before I start the autumn turn, I do need to kind of look at the whole Spanish situation and try to figure out, like, how would that work? What happens if Britain decides to declare war on a faction that pieced out, and it feels a little gamey to do that, to force another liberation war. But maybe you can only have one liberation war in the whole game. I don't know. I got to look that up. But that's summer, guys. So you can kind of see, Portugal, Spain has fallen amazingly. Portugal is about to fall. The rest of the French forces are looking to start heading east for the ultimate conflict with Russia and to maintain the Atlantic Wall against Britain. Britain's over-eagerness to try to attack France has ended in terrible defeat, and they're going to have to figure something out for the next turn. But we'll see. Real quick, before we get into the autumn turn, I did review the rules as it relates to the Liberation Wars, and here's how I read the rules all put together here. So yeah, as it stands right now, Spain is at peace with France and is neutral, right? The question that I was trying to solve was, well, can Britain declare war on Spain, now that it's neutral? It doesn't have to worry about the rights of the people rule, which I'm not going to explain all of that. If you look in the rule book, rights of the people, it would mean like France can't declare war on Spain for a certain amount of time until after the mandatory peace ends, which is not relevant here. But there's nothing to say that Britain couldn't just declare war on Spain. Just do it. Like, okay, well, congratulations, you were France's punching bag, and now we will declare war on you. And the reason they would do that is to maintain a dangerous front for the French supply lines, and easier to defeat Spanish than the French, and then maybe continue to cut supply to French forces deep in the Iberian Peninsula, right? That's sort of the thought process. Now, with Wellington's army decimated, it kind of doesn't matter, but for logic's sake, I wanted to figure out what applies here. So, in my mind, The way would seem to work, and this will probably find its way into my carrot and sticks, uh, video that I'll do about all the different mechanics. If Britain were to declare war on Spain, Spain would be a French ally for certain, right? Then then if you read the Liberation War rules and the Spanish instability rule, you would think at some point Britain could then diplomatically influence Spain, who they declared war on, to restart a liberation war. There's nothing in the rules that seem to indicate like a liberation war can only happen once. It seems like more than one could actually occur. Unlikely, maybe, but maybe it could. But that still requires Britain diplomatically influencing Spain. If I read the clauses around the mandatory peace period, a power is not able to be diplomatically influenced during the duration of the mandatory peace. Now, the question might be out there like, what happens to a mandatory peace if that power is now your ally? Now, in my reading of the rules, there's and some of this is maybe I'm missing something, but the way I read it, even if Britain were to declare war on Spain, and now Spain is a de facto ally of France, France still has a mandatory peace with Spain anyway until the end of the game in our case. So even if Spain were our ally, and thus, maybe in one of those conditions where a liberation war could spark up on us, it would still require Britain to diplomatically influence Spain or attempt it. And despite any of the modifiers or the low threshold to do it, Britain is not allowed to influence them until that peace treaty is up. And again, it doesn't matter if Spain is an ally of France or not. Technically, that mandatory peace is still in effect to my reading of the rules. So, would this be valuable? Would this be valuable generally at some point in a campaign game like this? Possibly. If we had rolled very poorly on the mandatory peace, so it was very short. Sorry, my computer's having connection issues with various things over here. If make sure I get my head straight on this. If we had rolled low on the mandatory piece, and the mandatory piece was only, we'll say, the minimum of 6 turns or whatever it was that the mandatory minimum is, and we didn't do an extended piece, let's just say that is a factor. So at some point, the mandatory piece between Spain and France is 1813 sometime, let's say. Then it is conceivable that Britain at some point would want to declare war on Spain, and then when the mandatory peace is up, or maybe after the mandatory peace is up, Britain declares war on Spain, and then tries to convert them over or something. Or I think at that point they would just try to diplomatically convert Spain over to be on the coalition side. So if I look at it like that, I think the rules interpretation that I have is such that there is not a gamey method here. The rules don't allow for it. So Britain cannot, even if they had a big army ready to drop into Spain at like Saint Sebastian or something, over here at the heel, and try to, or at the ankle, and try to do something here, they can't. So if they declared war on Spain, Spain would be a French ally. They could not force a new war of liberation. And until the mandatory peace established after the end of the first War of Liberation ended. And at that point, France would probably know that it's coming, and this would just be more sparking and tensions flaring between the Spanish and their French overlords, so to speak, right? So that makes sense, but you have to wait for the mandatory peace, which implies a certain amount of time has passed before the volatility of that relationship is such that Britain could convince the Spaniards to, the Spanish to rise up again for a second war of liberation. So as it stands, declaring war on Spain, if Britain does that, that would be a bad idea at this point, because again, it would just benefit France for longer than it would benefit the coalition at this point, and The significant thing that comes out of this is that France basically doesn't have to worry too hard about its southern flank, which will be very important in the late stages of the game. They can build up the Spanish army. They can put the Spanish armies in places that will be relatively safe and would be more of a pain in the butt for the British to deal with. Especially given in this game that we rolled very high on the mandatory peace for Spain, with the additional extended peace, meaning basically Spain is not going to be diplomatically influenced by anybody for the rest of the game. So this is still a major coup for France. Basically, they have one hex side of the French hexagon they simply do not need to worry about, and the others will be that much easier to defend for it. So anyway, I wanted to talk through that because again, I think it comes down to the rules interpretation. How do you fit all these things together? Um, that's my interpretation. The mandatory peace is what's really important here. How long is your mandatory peace with Spain if you win the War of Liberation, or the Spanish Liberation War as France? If it's very long, then you're going to be in really good shape. If it's not, then there could be a chance of some pain and suffering down the road, but it'll more likely come from Britain directly influencing Spain rather than declaring war on them and then trying to flip them, because that's just more money and more cost than is probably prudent for Britain at that point. Anyway, back to autumn 1811. Okay, autumn was a pretty quick turn just because for the chits that I pulled, there wasn't a whole lot to do. Um, Portugal has indeed fallen, and the pulling out of the parts of Spain that we don't need to occupy are being pulled out. So all kind of the supply line is there, but generally we're pulling folks out. We're getting them in. Napoleon actually has run up all the way to what is this, Liège, uh, and he might actually stay there, or at least kind of find a good place so that when we do production, many French steps can go directly to Napoleon's Grand Army. Um, I think Davout and some of the other forces could hold the Russians off, in time for Napoleon to get over there. And I'd rather have Napoleon, locked and stocked with with units and manpower. And we haven't yet had to do any additional major conscription activities. So I think that's where we want him. Really, the same for Massena. The army of Spain and the army of Italy are going to get probably replenished to some degree, and then they'll find some good positions to operate in southern Germany potentially. We'll have to think through things because again, we're gonna be fast approaching the time for Austria to be involved here. I should also point out that there is a mandatory alliance for Austria in effect. It was in effect during the autumn turn because it was basically peace until, well, I guess maybe even the summer turn. Austria should have switched over to a mandatory alliance. So both Prussia and Austria are in a mandatory alliance, but Austria has nothing but basically um, detachments and corps on the board and no leaders, again, because of the sandbagging of the British. So really, the Austrians are going to be waiting until the the spring of 1812 to actually have any armies on the board commanded by French control, essentially, or controlled by the French player, French side of my brain in this case. So the other thing I should call out before we get through winter, because again, winter is going to be very fast for me because it's mostly going to be more French movement across Europe, continuing to hold Portugal until the end of winter so it can be conquered, and basically maneuvering from here on out. Like the things have been decided, and again, we look to the east for the future of the campaign. If the coalition situation couldn't have gotten any worse, you might have been wrong about that because I did realize that the coalition player had a public event that had to be played which is the third Rome event card, which is technically a foreign war card for the Russians, and the Russians had to peel off an actual pretty decent sized set of forces. So they had to take off four infantry steps, a light cavalry, or two light cavalry steps, a Cossacks unit, and three leaders, which is a pretty good chunk. And I was fortunately able to peel them off somewhat evenly across the Russian armies. But maybe the coalition will get lucky, and that foreign war will end during the winter turn, the winter phases, the end phases of the winter turn. But it's not a great situation, all things considered, for the Russians. Not a great situation, because even those six steps would be vitally important in facing off against the French and the Prussians. Um, so there's a little bit now, even a detraction from the the Russian situation as they pursue their third Rome stuff with the Ottomans. What it does mean is, because if the British pull Russia in, and at this point they kind of have to, it also means that Britain can't try to pull the Ottomans in, because the Ottomans and the Russians can't be on the same side until that foreign war is resolved. So really shaping up to be a good position for the French player. I can't think of much that they would rather have going for them at this point. There's a solid position for them to stick it out. And again, keeping in mind that the French can win just by surviving through the end of the scenario. So if the war with Russia goes well, fantastic. If it only goes okay, okay. And we can make better decisions than Napoleon and not press super far into Russia. Maybe do very limited interactions there, and then keeping the Prussians and the Austrians kind of way out of field. So if they betray the French, the French are still going to be in a pretty good position to operate. So that's kind of the thinking here. Again, we want to put the Prussians and the Austrians in position where if they betray France, we minimize the damage. Maybe we don't go for broken Russia. We do very limited gains, and we just play a strong defense through the end of the scenario, and France can win that way. Anyway, let me take care of winter. It might be a really fast turn. We'll see what happens there. Okay, guys, that was a really fast winter turn. Basically, two chits came out before winter quarters was drawn. It was the neutral land chit and the French land one, so kind of everything got to move around a little bit. The thinning lines of the French control in Spain and Portugal moving out. When it comes to the peace turn, we will see Portugal conquered by France and probably going to have to be kind of reestablished as a minor country, because we're not adjacent to Portugal. I think that's the way it's going to work. Britain's going to have a pretty good chance of realigning Portugal back into its control if it wants to spend the money, but that's another money sink for them to have to think about. So I think that's, in general, just mighty fine for us. And then again, we're a lot of stuff's going to be handled off camera between this video and the beginning of the next video, where we're going to take care of that conquering of Portugal. We're going to probably be looking at that double checking and making sure the continental system is in fact in place. I believe that it is. And that will mean a money boost to France. That will also mean the production of Spanish units as a neutral, the creation of Austrian units allied to France, and then very critically, the decision of Britain to how it's going to arrange its money and potentially dump a lot of money into diplomacy to kind of shift the game. That is the one avenue that the coalition has. Britain by itself right now, standing alone, starting to sound familiar to World War II a little bit here, guys. Standing alone against the French Empire with the continental system hurting it. What can it do? What should it do? It needs to dump money into diplomacy to open up a new front, because Britain by itself, however good Wellington is and however good the handful of corps the British can project power with, simply won't be enough to win the game. It needs Russia. It needs the betrayal of the German states. But all of that and more will come in the next video for 1812. But this was the 1811 video. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope this was enjoyable for you. I realize we're not showing as much directly on camera, but you're watching the grand scheme of things play out. At some point, either after the end of this campaign and before I do anything else, I'll probably do that additional video talking about the different diplomacy mechanics and how everything flows together really interestingly in this game. You've gotten hints of it. I kind of want to talk it all in a concentrated place, but that is still to come. So again, thanks for watching. Take care. Keep gaming.